With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to the chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you, nice Nepal. Thank you indeed. Am I audible? One more check. Okay, yes, fine. Thank you. Well, a very, very good morning to everyone. And at the very outset, thank you to NICE for this honor, especially after having seen the intro video. Well, thank you one more time for this great opportunity on behalf of us all, as we are set to discuss one of the most pertinent issues, quite detrimental not only for Nepal's development and overall well-being, but for the entire region as well, and especially given the time that we are talking this topic on. Now, most of us here are certainly aware on the need status, the state of affair of SAARC, BIMSTEC, the two organizations which focus on the geographically overlapping regions. The questions today we will be, or the distinguished panel will be delving into, of course, coming from all the derivations of what I just mentioned, is the need, the prospects, challenges vis-a-vis the future of these entities. Now, I'm very, very much delighted, in fact, feeling very privileged to be steering a host of distinguished panelists. And I understand that in the interest of time, we all have been provided the intro of all our speakers to all the audience and everyone herein. And in the interest of time and from the advisory that I have had, with the permission from the distinguished panel, may I proceed for the deliberations, which I believe would be about 45 minutes for now. That means we will be allocating some 7 to 8 minutes to each speaker. Before I begin, just a quick pan the world across, and the trends in global affairs certainly are suggesting, the growing resistance towards regional cooperation, which once were considered a preferred means of propelling economic prosperity among the participating countries of the regional organizations. Now, the global mood, certainly, from what I see, is changing, shifting gradually. However, the story on our side may be different. We might be sending out different messages. However, the members in the region certainly look very keen towards regional cooperation and regional alliances, especially given the shift in global power equation, which is in, I think, it's a peak of a transition at the moment. I'm sure our distinguished panelists are going to shed light in the entire deliberation, argument, and perspectives that people have had in vis-a-vis Nepal's foreign policy, Nepal's development needs, its approaches, and of course, the regional cooperation. So without further ado, I quickly turn to our distinguished panelists and set the floor open for Ms. Niruka Sanjeevani Gamage, if I did it right, who's a lecturer, General Sir John Kotelawala Defense University. Over to you, Niruka, ma'am.
Thank you very much, yeah. Very good morning, all of you. Greetings from Colombo. I hope you can hear me clearly. Well, now I'm going to start the discussion, our discussion forum, with one particular kind of idea, maybe discussion on the geostrategic importance of China's involvement in Nepal and its impact on SAARC, right? So basically the discussion will be included my key assumptions, key questions, as well as key arguments as well. By moving to my first argument, which is small states are subjected to extra-regional influences. It is a well-known fact that the dissolution of colonialism in South Asian region actually backed small states, specifically their emergence as independent and autonomous entities. In that regard, Jayasekaran has pointed out that these continuous efforts of these small states to move forward for a kind of regional cooperation always derive security ambiguities because of the self-help and anarchical setup of this international system. Within this background, SAARC was formulated in 1985 with the objective of enhancing cooperation, stability, peace, and amity within this region. But this aspect has been challenged due to China's involvement in this region. So in that regard, my specific, main focus goes to China's involvement in Nepal. By expounding the fact that China's involvement in Nepal is followed by geostrategic importance, for a small landlocked country like Nepal, it is beneficial for them to develop relations with a rising power like China. That is the non-reality. And on the other hand, however, we need to accept the fact that it shows the China's greater strategy in South Asia too. If we move to the context of SAARC, SAARC is one of the few regional organizations which have a number of observer states than member states. So these observer states are like European Union, China, and as well as United States. So that particular status of China as observer state has expanded her maybe roots as roots within the region as a very competitive or maybe capable partner, capable competitor within the region. Within this spectrum of geostrategic importance, 1,414 along border with this China and between this China and Nepal has become one of the considerable or maybe the one of the crucial factor in developing or determining the relationship between the two counterparts. Along with that, Tibetan refugees, the influx of Tibetan refugees has been also increased in 2008. And even though Nepal gave a kind of sympathetic consideration on these Tibetan refugees, now they have expanded their surveillance in northern region because of the China's influences in tracking them and in monitoring them. So that is another perspective. And however, these purviews generates the fact that domestic landscape or maybe the security level of domestic landscape of Nepal is important for China. It's a vice versa kind of impact. Then on the other hand, specifically if we take the region like Tibetan Autonomous Region. So it is a very important area for China. So the level of security which is available in Tibetan Autonomous Region is always determined by the level of security which is available in Nepal too. With that, actually, from the side of development, also Tibetan Autonomous Region is one of the remote and underdeveloped areas. Since Xi Jinping has taken initiation to develop this region, for them it is beneficial for them to develop the relations between these Nepal and China. Since China is facing number of maybe challenges from Hong Kong and other countries in the region, the keeping this region as a kind of safe and secure entity is essential, is a must for them. Then my next question is whether that kind of, or maybe the China's involvement in Nepal can be recognized as one of the alternative regional frameworks. Specifically, if we look back to the China's strategy towards South Asia, Xi Jinping has mentioned the fact that they are much more keen towards developing common prosperity. On the other hand, Nepal constitution also promotes their intention to achieve a kind of gradual growth since the country underwent, amassed insurgencies as well as the overthrow of monarchies and political transition. From that kind of perspective, China's involvement as an ally in investment and trade has expanded their basically stance in the region by replacing the India's role in the SAARC region. Remarkably, Nepal signed BRI in 2017. So it also led to create the, kind of cooperative atmosphere for both countries to develop relations. As an example, a railway is also has been constructed from Nepal to China, and it is also goes through the protected Himalayan region, and also it includes dry ports too, which is always, which has been always criticized by the Indian authorities. However, this involvement of China in this region, as well as their observer status, has been always condemned by Indian authorities. Even 2014, Salman Kurdish, who was the former foreign minister, he also accepted the fact that though the number of observer states have done remarkable job in achieving their objective, it is the best time period to identify the clear setup and rules in developing their relations with SAARC countries. It gives a kind of hint or maybe the signal about the future involvement of China. Yep, the foreign policy and regional apparatus of the South Asian region is always, backed by neutral, maybe non-alignment policy, which is also known as the Panchashil principles, which includes mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity, mutual non-interference, mutual non-aggression, peaceful coexisting, those things. But this neutrality has become questionable, not because of the involvement of China, but also the dominance of India too. However, this can be identified as a complete opposite version of neoliberalistic perspective, as where this neoliberalistic perspective always develop more balanced and more open, more democratic relations among the countries. So with that, along with these realities, I would like to conclude the fact that there's no any doubt that China's involvement in Nepal has created a big challenge for the performance of SAARC. And SAARC has been existed for 36 years now, but has made it very slow progress. On the other hand, it is uncertain whether China will use this economic influence as a kind of political leverage to establish their stance in the region. So by placing that question, by placing that assumption, I would like to conclude and end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Niruka Sanjeevani. Thank you for bringing up this very, very important element, or elements, in fact, of the entire picture of where the region is headed towards and the major challenges facing not only Nepal, but the entire region as well. A long and a difficult road for each of the member states here in the region. Thank you, and I'm sure the speakers will be building up on what you just brought to the fore. And in the interest of time, because I've been told that we're already running, because of the spillover from the session earlier, we are running about 10 to 15 minutes late, and we need to cover that up. So I request all the speakers to be brief and precise, with apologies as well. And to the audience, the members in the audience, if you have any questions, comments, as the speakers place their statements and perspectives, kindly let us know if you have any comments or queries. And for that, you have this access to chat box. You can just jot in, scribble your comments or questions to our speakers, which we will try to entertain towards the end of the session. Said that, I quickly move on to our next speaker, Mr. Angshuman Choudhury, who's a senior researcher, Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Basnyat. And thank you to NICE for inviting me and organizing this panel. It's always a delight to speak on a NICE panel. What I'm going to do quickly is, and of course, good morning from New Delhi. And in that regard, what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak about SAARC and BIMSTEC a little sort of distinctively, because I do think they're going to have certain slightly different trajectories if we talk about the future of both organizations. And I also try to, since I'm in Delhi, I work in the institute, I'll try to give the Indian point of view on the future of SAARC and BIMSTEC. I think one thing that we need to be mindful of when we have discussions on South Asia, South Asian geopolitics and regional cooperation is that we are speaking in a very unique and in a very specific context, which is the context of an ongoing pandemic. I wouldn't even say it's a post-COVID context, because the virus hasn't gone away and the disruptions very much exist. We now have a new strain coming up, and several countries are actually contemplating resealing their borders. So I think that needs to be taken into account every time we talk about regionalism. So we are talking in the context where there's no doubt about this, that regional and sub-regional cooperation becomes absolutely essential. It's become more essential than in the past for both socioeconomic recovery and also preventing future pandemics. or future disruptions due to public health emergencies. So I think I don't think anyone would deny the fact that regional cooperation has become paramount. In that sense, what I think Ms. Basnyat also mentioned earlier, that there is a greater geopolitical shift, and there's a certain shift of power dynamics in the broader Asian region, particularly what is now known as the Indo-Pacific region, right? In that sense, regional formations like SAARC and BIMSTEC become important because they help mediate sort of intensifying tensions in light of these shifts, right? And they sort of somewhat moderate the adverse effect of big power politics in light of this context on small and medium powers. So I think in that sense, both SAARC and BIMSTEC, even from an Indian point of view, are absolutely crucial sort of formations. But I have a not so optimistic view of both SAARC and BIMSTEC when we talk about the future. More so about SAARC than BIMSTEC. I think BIMSTEC is a little more adept at and a little more contemporary in that sense in dealing with the current challenges and future challenges. But I believe both organizations are held back by, firstly, serious structural constraints and, a very grave and lingering delivery deficit. And it's sort of both are infamous for the lack of capacity to deliver the goals that they set for themselves. And secondly, I think there's, I would say there are serious doubts about commitment levels of individual members on both of these organizations. Again, less so in the case of BIMSTEC, more so in the case of SAARC. BIMSTEC, I think members are a little more interested in sort of pursuing their agendas. SAARC not so much because of certain obvious reasons, like the rivalry and the strategic competition between India and Pakistan, right? So in that sense, I think from the Indian point of view, both SAARC, as I said, SAARC and BIMSTEC are crucial platforms for economic development and sub-regional development, for instance, of Northeast India. But even India realizes the fact that there is a lack of sort of streamlining of the agendas and commitment in that sense. Now, this might certainly change in the future, but why I say I have a less than optimistic view is because the trends of the last 2 decades don't really speak highly of the near future in terms of where these organizations will go. Now, talking about SAARC, we see that the overall pace and scope of cooperation has been held back, as I said, by India, Pakistan, the political military rivalry between India and Pakistan. There has been no in-person summit since the last 6 years, which is really an unfortunate thing, right? But having said that, a recent example which sort of shines some light into a potentially positive future for the SAARC is how the SAARC COVID emergency fund came up, right? I think that was a very interesting and sort of precedent-setting attempt at leveraging regional energy into a crisis during a crisis. But I also remain skeptical of that because beyond some few initial contributions, of which I think Nepal received the highest share, about just more than 6 crore Indian rupees. I think beyond those initial contributions and some meetings, I don't think much has happened on the on the SAARC COVID collaboration under the SDMC. I think the last SDMC meeting, if I'm not wrong, was held in Feb of this year. So I think much more could have been done within SAARC when it comes to COVID-19, such as streamlining of vaccine exports or medical resource transfers, early warning of new variants, and etc. But I didn't see much of those sort of specific issue-based cooperation happen within the pandemic. So I think this is a general trend of SAARC. It takes up certain things that it doesn't follow up on those things. I mean, let's be honest about it. I mean, the good news now is that the daily, cumulative caseload in the SAARC region is coming down. So that's a good thing. And my own reading is that the disruptions that we are seeing would not last for the longer term, contrary to what many have said. I think serious disruptions have happened, but I think they're going to last only in the short term. Is how I read it. Secondly, I think SAARC remains very, very deeply fractured over Afghanistan. I think all of us know that, right? So the last meeting of the foreign ministers, which was scheduled in New York on the sidelines of the UNGA, was cancelled precisely because of that. Now, that's an issue, not just a vague, an abstract issue of consensus, but it's a very real issue because it can actually stall, the day-to-day operations of SAARC. because Afghanistan, sits at certain crucial governing bodies of other SAARC bodies, such as South Asian University or the SAARC Development Fund. Now, if there is no consensus, if there is no Afghanistan in one of these bodies and there is no consensus, I think these bodies will actually become practically dysfunctional or defunct. So it's a real problem. This consensus, lack of consensus of Afghanistan. I think SAARC needs to resolve that ASAP if it wants to move ahead. And as I said, like there are strong doubts about how much each individual is committed to this, individual country is committed to this entire regional project, or whether the goals of SAARC actually fall in line with their own national or regional goals. I think that's a major issue, and I don't think there is clarity on that even within national governments within SAARC, right? Economic linkages remain severely fractured within the within this organizational mandate. Things have been happening and moving ahead significantly on the BIMSTEC front, but within the SAARC ambit, I think trade and connectivity has suffered significantly, even more so in the post-COVID-19 context. And of course, like connectivity, as I said, like physical connectivity levels remain, I would say, less than impressive in this case. Very interestingly, I think in August, the SAARC Secretary General visited India, and the Indian Foreign Ministry put out a schedule of his visit, but I don't think there was anything that was put out after his visit, right? So then again, it goes back to how serious are the individual countries, particularly India, is about this entire grouping. And of course, like this is something that needs to be said in every meeting that we discuss SAARC, is that India really needs to be careful about its own dominance, within the organization, or at least the perception of Indian dominance in the organization. Because as I said, we are trying to sort of project these organizations or regional forums as mediators to big power politics, or mediators to fierce competition amongst big powers, or regional regional powers. So I don't think India would also like in other members of SAARC to see it as an overwhelming force that is also disruptive in a sense, right? So India really needs to be careful of that. Now, quickly coming over to BIMSTEC, I think, as I said, BIMSTEC is a slightly more promising grouping than SAARC, especially from the Indian point of view, because it's sort of trans-regional in nature. It fuses India's neighborhood policy and Act-East policy in a way, because BIMSTEC also has Myanmar and Thailand. I'll come to Myanmar. Myanmar is an entirely different case right now. But I think in the post-COVID context, BIMSTEC has the potential to be more effective than SAARC, and towards building more sustainable political, strategic, and economic depth within the broader Indo-Pacific region, or Asia-Pacific region, depending on where you are sitting and how you view the region, right? And I do believe there is certainly much more commitment from members on maintaining consistency within BIMSTEC than in the case of SAARC. I think the current chair, Sri Lanka, has been proposing, I think twice now, it has proposed an in-person summit now in December. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. The foreign ministers meeting happened in April. The leaders summit is, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen very soon. So I think there is consistency in terms of meeting also, and according to some feelers that we are getting, the agenda for the next leaders summit is very crucial. Actually, it's going to be the finalization of the BIMSTEC master plan for transport connectivity, BIMSTEC Convention on Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters, or the AMLAT Treaty, Coastal Shipping Agreement, and the MVA, the Motor Vehicles Agreement. These are absolutely crucial, instruments that BIMSTEC really needs to. It's high time BIMSTEC finalizes this agreement. And I'm glad they're on the agenda for the next meeting. But again, BIMSTEC essentially is also plagued by similar problems, fundamentally similar problems as SAARC, which is lack of delivery capacity, weak commitment, and certain geopolitical dilemmas, which I'm just going to come to. But I think one of the most peculiar problems with BIMSTEC is that it has a very heavy mandate that it has taken up for itself. I think it's taken up more than it can chew. It is like 12 to 13 verticals, and but hardly anything has happened in most of them, right? Except connectivity and stuff, in connectivity and trade. So I think BIMSTEC needs to really streamline and slice it down, so that it can focus on small objectives and move bit by bit. So that needs to happen. And also, I'm glad that in the last summit, which is held in Kathmandu, the Kathmandu declaration had something very, very crucial, which past BIMSTEC declarations didn't have, which is a collective, promise to reform BIMSTEC's delivery capacity, or BIMSTEC's capacity to deliver, which means a promise to upgrade human resources, financial resources, and the overall structural, and bring about an overall structural overhaul, which is which was highly needed, right? BIMSTEC was always bureaucratically very clumsy. So I think that particular clause in the Kathmandu Declaration is the way ahead to a brighter future for BIMSTEC. Now, for India, again, let's be honest about it. One of the things that India wants to sort of achieve through BIMSTEC is to counter growing Chinese influence in the neighborhood. I mean, that's almost like an open secret, if you could say. But at the same time, India wants to achieve this through some other autonomous objectives, like securing collective economic growth for the entire region and for its own specific sub-regions like Northeast India, right? Now, the key elements of this strategy is to, of course, strengthen like things like regional connectivity, trade, security, people-to-people contacts, the standard stuff, right? At the same time, I think all countries in BIMSTEC realize one thing, which is that when it comes to BIMSTEC borders, overland borders are extremely crucial, right? It's through borders that BIMSTEC can realize its full economic, geoeconomic, and regional capacity or regional potential, right? But again, developments on this front have happened in piecemeal fashion. Like, there is no comprehensive sort of plan that I see in that sense. I think once the master connectivity plan is finalized, we'll have a much more consolidated view of how BIMSTEC wants to approach this connectivity agenda. Again, last 2 points that I just wanted to make was very crucial for the future, which is I think BIMSTEC is, normatively speaking, BIMSTEC is designed to address sort of emerging non-traditional security challenges also, like climate change, cybersecurity. So because it has those verticals. But as I said, like these things, I think BIMSTEC should deal after it has resolved its pending agendas, right? It shouldn't sort of jump to that. Now, I just like quickly wanted to talk about the Myanmar bit because I personally look into Myanmar. Myanmar is my focus area, which is, there's a military coup happening in Myanmar, there's a military coup in Myanmar, and there's intense political instability. So when you talk about borders, I think one of the things that BIMSTEC should resolve in its next summit is how to deal with Myanmar, right? Ideally, given the coup government, it would not be sustainable to keep Myanmar in the grouping at this moment, because that would mean inviting the coup leader Min Aung Hlaing and legitimizing his regime in Myanmar. That would look straight out insensitive and would not even cohere well with, it wouldn't even augur well with ASEAN, which has been stubbing Min Aung Hlaing, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. So I think that needs to be quickly resolved in the next meeting, or the most urgent agendas that needs to be resolved. And the other thing that BIMSTEC really needs to think about is, does it even want to become, which it tried to become sometime back, a sort of quasi-security or security regime? Because I don't think that's a good idea at the moment. It can create security dilemmas. It can create severe internal fractures between its, members, and it could also become, result in BIMSTEC becoming a very, very reactive kind of an organization, which would not be good for the interests of its own member states. So I think these are some of the broader and more specific issues that BIMSTEC needs to deal with in its future. Lastly, and like just ending with by saying that, I think the issues that SAARC faces are far more intractable and serious in the short term, but BIMSTEC has a space to immediately resolve some of these issues. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Choudhury. I'm sure that we're not doing justice to all the speakers. We're discussing a huge topic, a very important topic, and then we're giving you a very, very limited time. I just didn't want it to stop. However, we need to pay heed to the time. But yes, as Mr. Choudhury says, that we're not coming from a very upbeat past. It's been quite disappointing on both these pairs, and then we're discussing the future prospects. However, and yes, as Mr. Choudhury was dissecting through, the performance, the potentials, the mandate of both the associations, of both the entities, I was just pondering whether it would be just to, view SAARC and BIMSTEC as equal alternatives, whether it would be justified. And because SAARC on one hand is a purely regional entity, I believe, while BIMSTEC is a little inter-regional in nature. Now, should we also think or contemplate or talk about whether the success of BIMSTEC should be viewed as, or the success of BIMSTEC be render SAARC as pointless? Should this be viewed in this light, right? So if we have time, we might come back to Mr. Choudhury later on these questions that I just was thinking about. So without further ado, let me quickly turn to our other speaker, the next speaker, who would be talking on Nepal's engagement with regional and international organization, Mr. Santosh Nandan Bhandari from South Asia Partnership, Nepal. It's 11:43. I can spare you 8 minutes, sir. So the floor is open to you.
Ma'am, one good morning to everyone. Is my voice audible?
Yes, but we're having some sort of a feedback.
Now, ma'am,
yeah,
is it audible?
Nice. It's nice. Yes, very well. Very.
Ma'am, basically, I wanted to focus on how Nepal has been dealing with all the international organizations since its formation of modern state. In this contemporary world, Nepal is one of the oldest state that has a history of dealing with international organizations or interstates of having more than 200 years of experience. Nepal's foreign policy is based on the UN's charter and its principles
Bhandari,
of
if I may
abiding.
Interrupt, Mr. Bhandari, if I may interrupt.
Hello.
There's an issue with the audio. We have some sort of echo in the audio. So,
wait a minute,
are you logged in through two devices, or is there an issue with your audio system?
It might be with my audio, ma'am.
All right, I just seek suggestion from the organizer. Shall we go ahead with this?
Yeah.
Right. Now, you are logged in through two devices, Mr. Bhandari, I guess. Can you log out from one of your devices? Maybe from your phone as well. I can see you are logged in through two devices.
Now, how is it better, ma'am?
Yeah, this is much better. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, since Nepal is almost participating in almost all the international events and its commitment towards fulfilling its international commitments through its basic principles of peaceful engagement with most of all the states. So I perceive that Nepal's engagement is another part, but how Nepal has been persuading or raising its national interest through the engagement with international organizations. It's the major issues, because engagement with international organizations is a part of engaging and mixing with all the international communities through multilateral forums. But at the same time, Nepal being stuck in the geopolitics of two huge large nations, India and China, Nepal should put its national interest, how to fulfill its national interest through the multilateral forums. Because if you see Nepal's history, we have experience being a landlocked state. Nepal has been facing a lots of problems, especially like we have faced the issues of economic blockade from India in past. So in that context, how international organizations and other regional organizations can help Nepal as well as other small states in that crisis. So how Nepal should put its foreign policy and engagement with other states in terms of fulfilling its national interest rather than being engagement in international organizations for the sake of multilateral forums. So my question is that my argument is that being a small and landlocked state, Nepal should now engage through its national interest through these regional and international organizations. For instance, SAARC being Nepal is the founding member of SAARC and other NAM. Though these are the multilateral forums in which Nepal has always been positioned itself through a unique way. But the question is that how, through these regional forums, Nepal has put its national interest. The basic principles of Nepal's foreign policy is based on United Nations Charter and peaceful engagement within neighbors. So my point is that how to much more enhance these multilateral forums through gathering of small states and fulfilling their national interests. Being in Nepal through South Asia, South Asian lens, our connectivity is really not as connected as we expected, but through these forums, Nepal expect to increase its connectivity through other forums. Like the interstate trade relations in South Asia is around 5%. When you see the physical topography of South Asia, we have the highest mountain of 848 of Mount Everest and lowest sea level. So there is vast differences in land topography as compared to Europe, where they have a physical topography of almost similar instances, similar geographical regions. So in that perspective, also being Nepal is the only country in South Asia that has not been colonized. While in context of other Europes, most of them were devastated by wars during World War. But the case is different as compared to Europe and Nepal in terms of regionalism, because Nepal being poor country that had faced many problems to development issues. So the main objectives of Nepal to engage through these international organizations would be to help in Nepal's developing activities. Like most of the international organizations have been engaged in Nepal through in capacity building of Nepal's people, Nepalese people, development aid and development assistance through providing technical assistance and other technical requirements for the development of Nepal. For instance, Nepal became the member of UN in 1955, 14 December. But being before being the member of Nepal to UN, Food Organization was actively working in Nepal, fulfilling the food shortage or other issues in Nepal. So my basic argument would be to how Nepal should fulfill its national interest rather than engagement with the international organizations. At the same time, Nepal, because of its geopolitical positions, Nepal should not allow its state for play of other big powers or other huge states. That's I came to end my of saying. It was.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhandari, for your very, very insightful inputs. Indeed, I think you lay a stress on Nepal, on the need for Nepal to be more clear on its own needs, and then on the approach that it should put forth in the international platforms that it has access to, and then play a proactive role in achieving those for the overall well-being and development for itself. Thank you, Mr. Bhandari. I'm sure we'll come back to you with more questions towards the end. I move quickly forward to Mr. Saroj Aryal from Warsaw University, who'd be talking on future of SAARC, a Nepali perspective. Mr. Aryal, over to you.
So good morning, everyone. I think I'm audible, right? Yeah, all right. So I'm Saroj, as you say. I'm in Warsaw at the moment. So I'm going to divide my talk in 3 parts. I'm going to present how and why SAARC was established, and then I'm going to talk what made SAARC so dysfunctional at the moment, and I'm going to talk about what are the possible solutions for SAARC to revive that genesis of what it established itself on the first place. So these arguments are completely based on my work, my publications. So I may refer to you on what publications to look for while I'm talking about it as well. So talking about this emergence of SAARC, as it's been already pointed out, it was established in 1985. So what was the pretext when SAARC was established was the Cold War was in full swing. The Cold War was like super in a very heated moment that time. And despite the torchbearer of non-alignment movement, India was a little bit tilted or inclined towards Soviet Union that time. And that automatically brought the pressure on the small state of South Asia to choose a side. So instead of choosing a side, a small state came together, and especially Bangladesh and Nepal, and later Sri Lanka and Maldives came together and came up with the idea to make this regional organization. It's not only about Cold War, but also the trend of establishing regional organization all over the world that time. So India first was very reluctant to join SAARC and termed it, if you check the academia as well, it has been termed as a small state gang up against India, but later they decided to join. So talking about how SAARC is functioning, functionalities of SAARC, it has only managed to do 18 SAARC summit in more than 30 years history. And last one was supposed to be held in 2016 in Pakistan, and SAARC is still waiting to hold its 19th summit. So this is the background. So talking about why SAARC is not functioning or what are the problems in SAARC, I think the first and foremost problem with SAARC is its charter. So SAARC charters forbid its to discuss bilateral issues in General Assembly. So that automatically made it very, very not possible to discuss so many bilateral issues going on between member states. So we have India, Pakistan as a major issue. We also have an issue of Pakistan and Bangladesh. And we also had an issue like Nepal-Bhutan refugee crisis. We have Nepal-India border crisis, or we have Sri Lanka-India issue like that has been going on since 70s when the civil war in Sri Lanka happened. So that's the first problem I see in SAARC. So second problem I see in SAARC is India. So I would say India is a problem and a solution of a SAARC. In a problem, the size of India scares smallest state. So it more or less hold the 80% of its share in most of the areas like economy, geography, population, and those things. And then that's why, because of its size and its engagement with neighboring countries, so India's every move somehow being perceived by small state as a meddling in domestic affairs of its neighboring countries. So there is a big question going on about how India can be or cannot be responsible brother, or India can or cannot be reluctant hegemon of South Asia. That's the second problem I'll see, and that can be summed up as a, if you want to see it from the academic perspective, that can be summed up as a small state, big state complexities that is going on in South Asia. And currently, especially after the announcement of Belt and Road Initiative, the South Asia is going on between some of these major policy orientation adopted by the powers or giant state between South Asia, India and China. India's foremost, the frontline foreign policy is called Neighborhood First policy. However, it has been going through deep problem of definition. First of all, they always talk about neighborhood first. We will deal neighbors first and those things, but at the same time, it has a serious problem with its definition and the intervention. What are the intervention and capabilities of that policy? On top of that, India's extended neighborhood makes it more complicated. So when there are so many problematic situations within neighborhood first policy, India now somehow define it as an extended neighborhood, which goes beyond South Asian neighborhood. It makes the situation more complicated as well, which makes South Asia is now somehow trapped between, how to say, Belt and Road Initiative and Neighborhood First as 6 of its state is the signatory of Belt and Road Initiative. And now Bhutan is also opening the communication to resolve the border and those issues with China. So because of these policy dynamics between India and China, in South Asia, small states are in trouble. So that's why somehow it creates the enthusiasm or some sort of frustration regarding regional organization, which has not been able to deal with any of these issues. So I recently have published one comparative studies of Neighborhood First and Belt and Road Initiative published by Asian Journal of Comparative Politics. So I have dig it very deep on this issue. And also from the academic perspective, I think it will be very interesting to talk from academic perspective what problem that SAARC and academic studies is having. So talking about how region or an area is perceived during Cold War, it was related to geography, culture, language. So when we talk about geographical proximity, when we talk about the cultural similarities or linguistical similarities, and it has mostly used by security studies or how to say security spy agency to learn about different regions. But after Cold War, the concept was shift from geography, culture, and language toward issue-based agenda. For example, we have some example like EU talking about how EU is perceive Indo-Pacific strategy, and ASEAN talk about ASEAN ways and those things. But I think SAARC is still stuck in Cold War concept of geographical entity, cultural similarities. Instead of going toward the issues and agenda, SAARC still talk about that we are a region, we have a cultural similarities. Although we have so many differences within that, and although we have so many bilateral issues, we are still, I think, stuck somehow in Cold War areas. So that's my major challenge is that I think SAARC is going through. So talking about what future holds for SAARC is, I think SAARC need to find a way to avoid controversies and focus on area of cooperation. For example, that cooperation can be, which already has been pointed out by my previous colleague, that can be economy, COVID, climate change, or non-conventional security threats like drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and other things. And I think SAARC also need to think about making a secondary mechanism to discuss bilateral issues. Although SAARC charter completely forbids to talk about bilateral issues, and also ASEAN charter also forbids them to talk about bilateral issues. But how they managed to talk and resolve bilateral issues was they established some similar kind of regional mechanism within ASEAN called ASEAN ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum. So I think SAARC also think about such forum where they can talk about bilateral issues and resolve within that forum, which will not hamper the affairs of SAARC itself. So I think India needs to take the lead here. Of course, without India's involvement, it's not possible to imagine a functional SAARC here. So if India needs to, so for example, we have Indonesia, for example, which lead all the decision making and all the initiatives. ASEAN in the starting days, which is the biggest state in ASEAN. And we also have China in South Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example. We have South Africa and African Union. So all these big states within that regional organization are somehow taking the leading position, somehow taking the decision making and leading this toward the somehow a functional level of regional organization. So India also somehow need to come to taking a charge of South Asia. And I think, and on the final note, that as it started from ganging up against India, somehow that's not a very positive note or positive terminology to use, but however, it started in that way. It started to somehow come together to somehow face India, a big state within the region. So I think it should be somehow revived and returned as something, and small state of South Asia should come together and find a common agenda to bring or drag India to work within the SAARC. So that's all from my side. So I'll be very happy to take the question later on.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aryal. Thank you indeed. As you put it, and I think leadership and commitment have been two major issues that have been stressed since the very beginning of SAARC, because we cannot deny, from the testimony that the European Union, ASEAN have given to us, and also for so many good things that these regional associations have given to the entire region, though they haven't been able to deliver at par or to our expectations. Especially everybody here, all the speakers, and I'm sure the members of the audience would agree about the prospects or the potentials they hold if they could perform. And I think leadership is one spare which really has been a call for in this entire journey. As we come towards the end, and since we are discussing Nepal's foreign policy in the context that we are discussing, and as Mr. Choudhury said a while ago during his presentation, that although we come from a very disappointing past, the disruption caused by the coronavirus, or even if we talk about Afghan crisis, these could have been opportunities for us to lead or revive the association in its essence. But I think we've failed so far, at least. But coming towards the end, just to wrap up, and since we're talking about Nepal's foreign policy, I turn to our speaker, Ms. Niruka Sanjeevani, and then I'll come to Mr. Choudhury and to Mr. Bhandari. Just briefly, within a matter of 2 minutes, just to wrap up, what could be the way forward now for countries like Nepal, who looked really trapped in this apparent Cold War? And then, wherein they are very much looking forward to the regional associations. Ms. Sanjeevani.
Thanks. It's a very interesting question. Actually, that's what we need to look out. So the first thing is, for a small country and a landlocked country like Nepal, it's important to maintain relationship with extra-regional powers. So there is because I'm telling that because within the region, they face a lot of problems because of India's dominance, as well as the regional implications, power implications, I would say. And in that case, since we are talking about SAARC and the role of Nepal in projecting her foreign policies, SAARC can be identified as a good platform to resolve those issues. The problem is the functioning. I don't know why it's not functioning, as my colleagues mentioned. There are a number of reasons regarding that, but that can be identified the ideal place to start, because apart from the BIMSTEC, I mean, SAARC gives a very unique kind of identity to these countries. So therefore, since Nepal is undergoing a number of economic problems, even political problems, it's important to develop relations with China, even sometimes even other countries too. There's no any bad side as I can see. Because within the region also, the other countries can also follow that steps. And by pointing out the fact that since my focus area was China, China has already invested in Nepal. Not only that, even China has invested in Afghanistan too, because of the withdrawal of United States. So their presence is everywhere. So we can't move away from that. But as a region, or maybe as SAARC region, maybe the BIMSTEC platform in that sense, we need to cope up with these challenges. We can't move away from those realities, but it's up to the leadership and it's up to the government to decide what method that we need to accept and follow. Yeah, but my point is, yes, we need, we need to use these extra-regional powers, extra-regional influences, or maybe the assistance to develop this country. Yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you indeed. Over to Mr. Choudhury.
Yeah, thanks. So I pretty much agree with what Niruka said, and I particularly think that countries like Nepal, it's high time they start asserting their own vision for these organizations, and they start doing so assertively. and talk about within the organization, talk about what they want SAARC or BIMSTEC to be in a post-COVID context. And I think the post-COVID context is a very dynamic, new kind of a context that we are seeing. It's not even, I wouldn't even call it a new normal yet, but as some scholars have used a very interesting term called now normal. You know, whatever normal we're seeing right now is the now normal. The new normal could actually be pretty much what the old normal was. But within this dynamic context, I think countries like Nepal really, need to sort of start also finding very, very specific issue areas of cooperation, like trade, connectivity, particularly border connectivity, in that sense. And also, as I said, post-COVID context, I think collaboration over the pandemic, I will still insist that collaboration over the pandemic can be a very, very effective way for countries to sort of paper over, to sort of mediate their internal differences and fractures over past issues and move ahead from a fresh slate, I think. Because we saw this was a crisis which actually wasn't predicted in the longer term, but came as something that really disrupted everything, right? So I think this is a great lesson that without regional cooperation, and if we keep bickering over issues, I think we're not going to move ahead. It's only going to be bad for the region. But as I said, if we talk about countries like Nepal, we have to be conscious of the power dynamic between a small country like Nepal and a big country like India, right? That perception that India is a hegemonic or dominant influence, as I said earlier, India also has to be careful of that perception, conscious of that perception. And on the other side, Nepal has to really come up, perhaps, with an assertive agenda of how it wants to move ahead with SAARC or BIMSTEC, and not let issues like, the rivalry between India and Pakistan affect SAARC or drag SAARC into oblivion, So I think, yeah, that's one way to move ahead. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Choudhury. Mr. Santosh Nandan Bhandari, please. You're muted, sir.
With the new paradigm shift, now it is essential to address these problems to the a matter of equal participation, equal respect of sovereignty, and respect of their mutual needs through these special issues of trade, economic, and other bilateral relations. Beside that, the countries should also stop bandwagoning, and the mechanism of balance of power should be developed in order to avoid this type of further hindrance in the regional organizations. At the same time, I would like to suggest that being most of the members of SAARC and BIMSTEC are almost similar, so why don't we make a greater South Asian or BIMSTEC nation with merger of all the countries through making a greater or one South Asia? Thank you for the questions, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Bhandari. And a couple of minutes, the final couple of minutes to Mr. Aryal.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you for, I'd like to express gratitude to the chair and the organizer at last. So talking about SAARC and its role of Nepal in that sense, I'm not sure if there is so much of room for Nepal to do things alone in SAARC, within SAARC. So the best way to make SAARC functional would be to bring small states together. So that I think the SAARC, the establishment of SAARC itself was somehow emerged in the mind of the leader of Bangladesh, and somehow he shared that idea to King of Nepal, and the thing that goes on. So Nepal should find out the commonalities and start forming somehow, or start opening that channel of communication with a small state within South Asia. So that can work. And in talking about the broader perspective, I think SAARC itself, internationally, SAARC somehow failed to portray itself as a regional organization somehow. Talking about it, ASEAN have a mechanism for ASEAN +1, ASEAN +3. ASEAN is the member of this, one of the greatest trade signing called RCEP now, but nobody deals with SAARC as an entity. there are very, very less or very few examples that people or international actors deals with SAARC as an entity. So that's not happening so far. So everyone likes to deal. Everyone likes to deal with South Asian state bilaterally or individually. So until and unless SAARC portrayed it as a regional organization or as an organization as a whole, it's not going to happen. So that's one thing. And second thing, in terms of Nepal foreign policy, I think it needs some revival. I think it's the core foreign policy of non-intervention and coexistence is somehow very, very old concept. So we need to evolve. So that's a very, very Cold War centric foreign policy that we have. We need to emerge. So I think doing economic liberalization and changing the mechanism of economic development and those things, India somehow move forward from that Panchashil to somehow balance of power and trying to increase their role in international intervention. So Nepal also somehow should think about changing its foreign policy, especially when we are dealing with India and China at the same time. And we are also thinking of dealing with USA at the same time. So in that sense, that Nepal really needs to go through some foreign policy or strategic changes at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So these final statements, I believe, pretty much sums up the ideas floated today on the topic that we were here for, though the time did not permit us to discuss more elaborately, which the topic certainly demands, but we just believe and hope that this is just the beginning of our networking and then exchange of ideas so that we look forward towards a robust and, a more enhanced cooperation in the region and beyond. Well said that, thank you to our distinguished panelists for your very valuable time and for your very insightful and enriching words. Thank you indeed from NICE and from myself and from all the members of the audience. To the audience, thank you. Thank you for your great support and being there. Over to the organizers. Thank you.